Hello everyone, this is Pavan Kumar speaking, and I'm quite concerned about the way we have all seen and understood cities so far. But now, over the last couple of years, I've seen a lot of changes happen in terms of how we actually think about cities. We see a lot of flyovers coming up, we see a lot of other kind of uh, structures that are car centric and not so much people centric across a lot of Indian cities. And primarily that has to do with the fact that a lot of it is coming from a sense of or an idea that there are uh, instances where car is given priority for the very simple premise that car signifies upward social mobility. That is the case. But the problem here is cars are actually, in terms of vehicles sold, and if you take the figure of total vehicles, what are light motor vehicles, mind you, the classification and light motor vehicle. Of this classification, cars are occupying at the max 20% of the sales of or the number of registered vehicles that you see. It's about only 20%. So what about the rest? The rest largely is in terms of scooters or two-wheelers, different kinds of two-wheelers that we have right now, electric or be it even the bike or the moped or the scooty, or simply the kind of non-gear, the scooters or two-wheelers that do not have any gears to them. So, in terms of purchases and in terms of registration, we see that cars are actually limited, but the number is growing in a big way. But the question to ask for those of us who are interested in terms of transport analysis and trying to understand how cities actually, map their transport behavior. Or if you want to map it, uh, it comes from this basic premise that cars are not actually the dominant mode of transport. In fact, there are studies which point out that it's actually, I know, a lot of poor people or people in the lower income belt, in the lower income categories across cities, primarily sort of prefer using bicycles, and public transport system, whatever is available. It's bus or some other means of quasi-public transport system. So it's not exactly car, bikes either. So the way cities actually have the transport dynamic sorted out is very different from what we actually assume. Because what we see on the road is not necessarily what is actually the broad number that you take. When you take the aggregate, it paints a very different picture from what we actually see on a daily basis and encounter in traffic jams and all those long honk, a lot of honking that goes on. We actually feel there's a lot of cars. That is one point. The second point here is that a lot of congestion that we see is happening largely because of the capacity of roads to hold more vehicles is limited. That's a no-brainer. Anybody can tell you that. But as more and more vehicles come out onto the roads, be it buses, be it cabs, or be it anything. So generally, the metric is more the number of vehicles on a single road. The capacity is limited, but when it goes on, congestion naturally happens because when you have, let's for instance, let's assume a 100-meter road, a stretch of 100 meters. The capacity is not more than 500 cars throughout, up and down. What happens if the capacity goes up twice? Naturally, because of the limited road space, the additional number of cars extends on both directions. So the way you understand it is the way generally people understand congestion is it's because of a signal. It's not necessarily because there is a signal, but there's also a limited road capacity. So the supply of roads is limited. What do the smart people or generally the economic solution is when there is less supply, you actually try to increase the supply and meet the demand because that's what the market forces demand. In doing so, let's take a standard solution that the governments take on this kind of matters, and that is let's add one more flyover because we assume that it can fix the additional road space that that particular road set needs. And naturally, you have another flyover coming up or another underpass or expansion of the roads. I would welcome expansion of roads because given the limited number of roads that we have in most cities or the road space, naturally the congestion factor uh, is something that does not really surprise me. Now the question is, how do you solve congestion in Indian cities? Let's let's for a moment take this alternative. I don't know. The point here is the roads that we have and the kind of traffic that we see. The vehicular traffic is very dynamic, and the roads are very, not in a very good condition across most cities. You have pockets where the roads are good, and you have a vast number of roads which are actually not, motorable in that sense because you continuously see a lot of potholes and the roads are always dug up. There are a lot of such problems happening because of a very different factor. That's related to administration and that's also related to the kind of municipal governance that we have in our cities. But let's not go there. Let's stick to this particular aspect. What are the solutions available for us? In terms of availability of solutions, there are control solutions, also market-based solutions for most of the problems that we have. So, right, from the economic perspective, we have one tool is a general levy of penalize people from using their private transport system. So, in terms of bikes or cars, when people actually use certain such where it is heavily congested and still people prefer to travel in just one in their own cars despite public transport options available. So there one tool is congestion tax which has been worked out in many cities. It has necessarily been under consideration in a lot of cities and a lot of countries, but not all have come up and implemented them. The latest one to implement congestion tax is New York. The city of New York has decided to implement it just about a week ago, and soon enough, slowly, we have sort of seeing some result coming across in the city, where you have people preferring the subway or the bus stands that's available, or also preferring alternative modes, maybe carpooling or those kind of things. And congestion tax, incidentally, has been in vogue in terms of discussion in India right from 2013. And in fact, I would argue that it can go back as far back as 1962 when a concerned citizen from Bombay wrote to the editor of the Economic and Political Weekly asking for some sort of a congestion pricing to be implemented in Bombay, that is today Mumbai. So that's how far back we actually go in terms of thinking about ways of congestion control. So congestion tax, which is a price levy and sort of directly impacts people who are using it. Now there are several exceptions laid down for congestion pricing mechanisms across different cities where congestion tax is actually being practiced or implemented right now. One such is London, and the other is Singapore, and also cities like Stockholm and Hong Kong have also implemented it with successful results in some and not so successful results in others. Now, congestion tax being one such control factor, the other option that is something Paris, the capital of France, implemented, which is a certain sort of quantitative control or sort of banning the use of cars itself or motor vehicles itself in a designated area in Paris, which is about 5.5 square kilometers of total area. Now, these are experiments that cities are considering and attempting with a very brave, drive that they have, which obviously for Indian cities will take some time to actually shape up. Only yesterday or the day before, we saw a news item in one of the popular newspapers that the state of Maharashtra is kind of sort of considering implementing congestion control or through car control and quantity of cars a family can have, and we are slowly somewhere getting around in that discourse, saying that congestion is something has to be controlled directly and not indirectly. Now, the question that we all have to ask here is, to what extent are we actually having our city dynamics or city traffic laid out? How many cities are actually having not just metro rail, but enough metro rail, enough public transport system, which is metro, bus, local train if you may, and other sort of paratransit systems? And to what extent are they actually functioning to their optimum? And which one is actually best suited for that city's long-term development? Just because you have enough metro, that doesn't always necessarily mean that you actually have to go and push more for a metro rail. It might be the case that the city is actually needing a bus transport system or bus rapid transport system along with a metro. You always have to complement public transport system. You cannot have just one as a dominant mode of public transport. There has to be an optimum mix that is relevant for that city given that city's conditions. So let's take the city of Hyderabad. So as per the TomTom index that just came out, Bangalore was the most congested city in India, and now that position has taken by Calcutta. And then Bangalore and Pune is the third and Hyderabad is the fourth. But interestingly, the city with the most negative publicity about congestion and a lot of other problems in terms of pollution, a lot of this, Delhi is actually around 15th on the list, 15th or 18th. I'm not very, the exact number is something you can always check up. This shows that the actual system where you have enough public transport coming in can actually reduce the congestion time. Despite Delhi having a lot of smog and despite the city getting brickbats for its ill-famed pollution control policy in terms of odd even, where odd number of vehicles having odd numbers were allowed to ply on one day and even number was allowed to ply on another day. Despite these kind of measures, Delhi has been getting a lot of negative feedback in terms of congestion. But as per this TomTom index, of course, which has its own limitations, but still, nevertheless, that's a sort of a primary benchmark that we can have in terms of assessing how congestion is in our cities. So as to that, Delhi is actually at almost quite a much lesser rank than other cities. That means Delhi has actually performed well relatively in terms of controlling congestion. So now how does this particular index measure congestion? So in terms of calculating, they sort of take an average picture, like average time that takes to cover 30 minutes, about 10 kilometer distance. What is the time that it takes if there was congestion and if there was no congestion? They take a ratio of that, and using data from different aggregators and transit maps and these kind of things, they come and arrive at this figure. So this figure tells that Delhi, which actually had a lot of this feedback in terms of congestion, even Bangalore did. But Bangalore was not so successful yet. It only sort of dropped down by a few minutes, or hardly a minute or so, from the last time the index was calculated. So now the case of Delhi points out to all of us that a large sort of focus, large amount of focus has to be put in understanding the city's traffic dynamics first and then going for the right solutions. So when we see kind of news that is out there that people governments in different states are actually going for DPRs on tunnels, flyovers, it's not just Bangalore but in many other cities that we are seeing. The question really comes in terms of asking the public representatives how much do they understand traffic and the whole transport dynamics. And the economics of transport itself is a very big subject if we take the Indian cities, particularly those where there's significant population density. Because going forward, a lot of cities are actually having this problem even at the entry points of those cities or towns, or inadequate bus systems or inadequate sort of intercity travel through buses is not available, particularly in the northern parts of India. There's this problem. Whereas in south, you actually have a significantly available, it's abundant right in front of your eyes. A lot of public transport options are available if you wanted to go from one city to the other. Let's say I would want to go to somewhere in Vijayawada from Hyderabad. There's a government bus readily available for me at different points of time. I can always consider that instead of going to Vijayawada by my car. Now the question there is, in those cities when I go, do I actually have that much of an option? That is where we have to focus next. So the big cities show what is the problem when things are not managed, and tier 2 cities show where experiments can be held. So in terms of tier 1, tier 2 and tier 3 cities, you actually do not have that problem to the extent that you can actually directly point out and intervene through public systems. But there's always a case that we can make out where we actually put in enough bus systems, because bus is the most ubiquitous one that is available, and that's also economically cheaper. No, cost of buses is much less than building a grandiose metro rail cutting across corridors. And honestly, from my point of view, and it's my personal opinion, but when I saw that Agra had a metro, I appreciated the fact that they took out some interest on those kind of cities. But does the city really need a metro? Or was there any other option that could have been considered in lieu of the metro? Is where the transport economics questions comes in. So that's my broad picture as to what could be done. So congestion pricing, congestion control. There's also the option of scaling up public transport. So the rider for all of this kind of pictures or the kind of policy approach that we have regarding congestion should not happen until and unless there is an optimum level of public transport capacity that has reached. So if you were to say, how do you define that? So if I have, let's say I would want to implement congestion tax between two areas in Gachibowli, let's say from Raidurg police station onwards all the way till the financial district. That would be about 2 to 3.5 kilometers, or maybe even 4. Now 4 kilometers is a serious, it's a significantly high distance for congestion tax to be experimented. Now what would a person who is not so well off do but to go in to his office, to his workplace on his own scooter, on bike? Of course not a car, but he still has a certain willingness to pay, and the willingness to pay varies as per passengers. we actually use that route. So when we consider congestion tax, you also have to consider what is the trade-off that you have, or how do you plan to switch, and how much of the sacrifice is going to be made by people, and how much is that going to be added onto the public transport system, be it bus or be it metro or be it some other option. So that is something you have to, like policymakers generally have to consider before they actually go for these kind of tools, because an alternative that is there should be sufficient enough to offset the sacrifice that is made by people who are actually wanting to pay, not wanting to pay congestion tax and want to use public transport. So that's where the option comes in, and that's where we'll have to put our focus on. So the economics of transport for our cities is very dynamic in that sense, and not very clear cut or very formally identified, unlike cities in the West, which actually have tons of data and tons of work being done on this kind of things. So that's my broad picture about what could be done and what can be done. So we have a lot of tools in economics which could be used to consider and make our cities life in cities bearable, better, and sustainable in the long term. So thank you.